Hey everyone, I just wanted to chat with you for a minute about paraphrasing and avoiding plagiarism. I know that most people are aware of what plagiarism is, but there's a lot of misperceptions out there and there's a lot of fear in doing things wrong, and it's really unfounded. There's a lot of easy tips and techniques out there to avoid it. So I just want to kind of go through that for a minute. So what is plagiarism? Plagiarism is just using someone else's words or ideas and claiming them for your own. So the main way that people do that is they may paraphrase an article that they read and then not provide a citation, an in-text citation after that. And in that sense, they're making it sound like it was their research or their work that they did. So we'll talk about that in-text citation in a minute. The other thing people do is quote exactly from the text and don't change it up. Don't insert quote marks, and then they cite it and they tell you where they got it from, but they have not put it into their own words, and so that's plagiarism too. And the general rule of thumb with that is that use any information that is not your original thought, your original research, or common knowledge needs to be cited. So when you write these scientific papers, it is pretty common that you will not have very much of your own original thought or writing, especially if you're doing a literature search and it's not your own project. So how that then feels and looks is that every sentence has a citation after it, and that's fine. Like, that's legitimately how scientific writing works. You just need to make sure you give credit where credit is due. So when in doubt, cite your source, cite that information. If you're not sure if it's common knowledge, then just cite it. You can't really go wrong there. But how do you paraphrase it? How do you put it in your own words? And that's what we're going to practice here with an activity in your discussion thread. So first of all, I want to make a couple other comments that I see students do. They're so worried about not paraphrasing something correctly that they just quote everything. And that will make for really, really weak writing and really choppy writing. So try to avoid quotes. And I would say avoid them 100% at this point in your career. The only time quotations should be used is when the information that you're trying to convey from the original source will lose some kind of impact, emotion, or effect by paraphrasing it. And in that case, you might want to use a quote, but it's really hard to decipher what those situations are. So I suggest just avoid them completely at this point in your writing. Especially avoid them if your writing is scientific in nature. It's not meant to be wow and grabbing people's attention. It's meant to be more factual, in which case you do not need to quote. So rule number one, don't quote. Rule number two then is, how do you paraphrase information? So I want to go to some original text here and see if I can pull this up. Make myself small. There we go. So this is an article from Chad Bishop, who works for Parks and Wildlife, written in 2009. And there, you can see there's a whole lot of authors here. So in blue, I have highlighted the title of the paper and who it is. This is the citation. So effect of enhanced nutrition on mule deer population, rate of change. Okay, so maybe we're doing a literature review of mule deer and habitat conditions. And as I was reading, I found this information here highlighted in yellow. It says, we therefore evaluated the effect of enhanced nutrition on deer during winter and spring on fecundity and survival rates using a life table response experiment involving free-ranging mule deer on the Uncompahgre Plateau in southwest Colorado. If I keep reading, and you could read in the middle if you want. By manipulating nutrition and leaving natural predation unaltered, we determined whether habitat quality was ultimately a critical factor for limiting mule deer populations. So the first thing that I would do if I were you is sit back and go, what does that actually tell me? What do I understand about what they put in there and what do I not understand? If you can like verbally express that information in your own words, that's a good start. So let's start with it. they looked at whether or not they could supplementally feed deer, right? They enhance nutrition somehow. And if we read more, we'd probably figure out exactly how they did that. But they provided them with higher quality food in some capacity or another. It may not matter, right? And they did that during winter and spring, and that's when food is usually your limiting factor. And they looked at fecundity and survival rates. Okay, this is a wildlife specific term. So fecundity would be how many offspring a doe mule deer could produce. All right, so they're looking at it's basically birth rates is what you could do. And the idea there, just a little aside, is that deer that are in poor nutrition, and this goes for most wildlife species, if an animal is in poor nutrition and poor health because of poor nutrition, they aren't likely to reproduce. They're not even going to produce eggs. They're not going to cycle into heat, and they won't produce offspring that year. That's one of the first things the body's going to do to protect the mother. Because she doesn't have enough energy, she doesn't have enough reserves to give birth, and so she won't get pregnant. So that's what that's saying. Okay, so they looked at whether or not increasing the nutrition is going to affect the doe's ability to reproduce and survive. So they're looking at survival rates. And we could go into what their life table response is. It doesn't really matter right now. But let's look down here and say by manipulating nutrition and leaving all the other things that might kill deer in place, so leaving natural predation, we determined whether habitat quality was a critical factor limiting the deer population. So how can we say that? Well, we'd say, well, they manipulated nutrition to see if it impacted mule deer's survival during the winter and spring and mule deer's ability to produce young. Simple, right? Doesn't that sound so much easier than the words they used anyway? So talk through a paraphrase, read through a whole paragraph, and then ask yourself, well, what did that actually tell me? Is there anything that's relevant to the questions I'm asking in that paragraph? Then you can use this little tool that our writing instructors on campus taught me last semester. I think this is awesome. It's called a citation sandwich. So now we think, all right, there's 3 pieces to your citation sandwich. There's going to be a signal phrase. Now, a signal phrase is something in your writing that says, hey, what I'm about to tell you is from this source. And so it might be something like this for this particular example. A study on the Uncompahgre Plateau in southwest Colorado found, and then you're going to move on to your summary or paraphrase, but that signal phrase says, hey, here's some information that didn't come from me, and I'm about to tell you what it is. Another way of doing it could be like, according to Smith and Johnson, 1982, black bears enter hibernation in Utah in late November. And so it could be something like that where you're saying according to the authors and then you provide your signal phrase. You could go a wide variety of these. So think about how could you introduce what you're about to say, and then you move into your summary or paraphrase. And the summary that I have here is taken from that article, but it's reading further, so don't get confused. I could put a summary being that authors looked at nutritional quality on survival of adult mule deer and their ability to reproduce. That would be my summary. The one I have written here also came from that article, but the summary of the results would be mule deer fawn survival was higher when nutritional quality of forage was also higher. Now, that's not their exact words, but it's their meaning. So I didn't change the meaning. I just put it in my own words. And then I would need to insert an in-text citation. And that depends on the citation format that your teacher has instructed you to use or that your publication journal has instructed you to use, whatever it is. I like the author date format that can come from a type of citations called Chicago, and also APA citation as well. So because there was multiple authors, it would say Bishop et al. That means and others, and then the year, and you would put that in parentheses after this summary. So let me show you what that looks like. You put all that together and your sentence would look like this. A study on the Uncompahgre Plateau in southwest Colorado found that mule deer fawn survival was higher when nutritional quality of forage was higher. Bishop et al. 2009, in parentheses with the period after the citation. So that's pretty simple, right? Just first of all, trying to understand what you're reading. If you don't understand it, you can't accurately convey the right message in your paper. That might require you looking up some terminology or searching around to try and figure out what it's saying. So stick with the stuff you understand. Nothing points to they don't know what they're doing, like a student not having the right meaning or context behind whatever they're talking about. So understand what you're reading about, summarize it in your own words, and then think about this citation sandwich where you can just put it here in one simple sentence. And I misspelled Bishop, and that is going to bother me, so we're going to just fix that real quick. Bishop et al. 2009. Period goes after the parentheses almost always, not almost always. It always goes after the parentheses. Your punctuation does. The best way to break this down and make it not be as intimidating is for you to practice it. So that's what I'm going to have you do next.